I was born a white, heterosexual male to an upper middle class family in the most educated state in one of the richest countries in the world. I have privilege. And to say that these privileges have impacted the course of my life in some way or another would be a drastic understatement. My name is Ken Damon, and it wasn't until recently, in my later developmental years, up until where I am now, that I began to realize how impactful these privileges were on my life. Through a variety of events and experiences, I began to peel back the curtain into the reality of our world by being mindful and grateful for all the things that I'm given. One of these key experiences came 5 years ago, when I was fortunate enough to take a trip to South Africa. And although we marveled at the eloquence of the African elephant and the beauty of the Cape Town coast, we also saw extreme poverty, a side of the world that I hadn't been exposed to up until that point. It was in one of these impoverished townships that I had an interaction with a local boy. As I remember, he was about a foot taller than me, with broad shoulders and a deep voice, clear signs of adulthood. Seeing as I was only 12 years old at the time, it was obvious that this boy was older than me. This boy begged me for money. You see, I was walking along with a group of teachers with a few cents rattling in my pocket. They were American quarters. I was handing them out to local children as little mementos of my culture. But when this boy approached me, I felt intimidated. And so, although I'd been taught to be generous throughout my life, I froze. And I regret this, but I walked right by. Now, I'm sure many of you would assume that this boy held the power over our interaction. Like I said, he was taller than me, he was stronger than me, and he was older than me. With age comes a sense of accomplishment and achievement with all the experiences that we have. At least in our own society, we tend to give a subconscious power to the people who are older than us because of this wisdom and this experience. However, in this scenario, that wasn't exactly the case. You see, if someone were to have a parallel look into both of our lives, it would quickly be made clear that I've had more opportunities, a better educational experience, and overall a vastly easier life. So I began to realize that because I had all these things that I didn't work for, and that I deserved no more than he did, I had undeserved control. This is the first time in my life that I remember being so conscious of my privilege that it hurt. Because I realized that these things that I had, I deserved no more than he did. Yet I had control. But I also began to realize that identifying a given privilege is the first step in being able to utilize it for good. After all, you can't build a house if you don't know what tools you need to use to build it, right? The second key experience from this trip came with my interactions with a group of local children. You see, we were driving along, and seeing as I was traveling with a group of school teachers, when we saw a group of local kids playing on the side of the road, we had to pull over and say hi. And so we did exactly that. We pulled over, we got off the bus, and after a few minutes of interacting with these local children, I realized that I was incredibly uncomfortable. I was uncomfortable because up until this point, I had had the privilege of surrounding myself with people who were scarily similar to myself. You see, I go to school, go to after-school activities, and generally hang out with people who are in a very similar economic and cultural situation as I am. Interacting with these kids who knew and grew up in a totally different world made me uncomfortable. However, my mom is very good at helping me face my fears, so she suggested that I hand out candy to these kids. You see, we brought a bag of Twizzlers on this trip for this very scenario. So I got back on the bus, grabbed my gallon bag full of Twizzlers, and the kids formed a single file line, and I had the opportunity to hand out candy to each one of these kids. And seeing their faces light up and watching them celebrate with their friends was truly priceless. Now, although this is a small event, it got me thinking that being able to use a privilege for good doesn't have to be this giant philanthropic endeavor. It can be something as small as donating a bit of money when they ask for it at the store, or bringing over food for a neighbor who recently got out of the hospital. This event helps me realize that every little bit counts. So, enough about me. How can you begin to use your own privilege in your own life for good? Well, I've created a very simple two-step process so that you can begin doing exactly this. Those two steps are to identify and act. The first step, identify, is exactly what it sounds like. Identifying a privilege requires an objective, unbiased look at the things in your life that you often take for granted. This could be something such as your economic privilege in your community. Or, if you keep up with the news, through the recent Me Too and BLM movements, maybe you've realized that your race or your gender protect you from discrimination and bigotry in your community. For me, my experiences in South Africa allowed me to get a sense of my economic privilege on a worldwide scale. But even once I returned to Massachusetts, I began to be more aware of how I could help improve my own community through my privilege. However, I have to warn you that identifying a privilege can be very difficult. I know I felt incredibly guilty when I realized all the privileges that I had, because even though I wasn't consciously aware of them, I'd still taken advantage of the benefits that they brought throughout my life. However, this is also the first very important step in being able to utilize our privilege for good. I think it should also be noted that just because you have privilege doesn't mean that your struggles or the tribulations that you've faced throughout your life are any less important. Like I said, I'm a white male with a myriad of other privileges, but I've still faced struggles in my life that I've had to overcome. And just because I have privilege doesn't diminish those struggles in any sense. The second step is to act. So now that we've identified our privilege, I believe that we should try and work towards both earning the benefits that those privileges bring, while also working towards closing the gap between the privileged and the non-privileged. My experiences in South Africa allowed me to realize my economic privilege on a worldwide scale. And then once I returned to Massachusetts, I began to look for ways in which I could help locally. I can now confidently say that after 6 months at the local food pantry, that I've begun to do my part in giving back. However, I should warn you that like the first step, acting also takes a great deal of hardship. Being selfless solely for the sake of helping others takes a great deal of internal motivation and tenacity. However, I hope you're beginning to get the sense that using our privilege for good is so incredibly important. As this ancient proverb says, with great power comes great responsibility. It is our job as people who live in a society that values equality to use our power and our privilege for good. Only through the actions of everyday people like you and me will we be able to create a more empowering world. Helping people feels good. I think we should all try it. Thank you.